All right, this lesson, assignment 10, is going to be on absolute value. So, some things I want to make sure you guys understand before we get into this is, first of all, the definition of absolute value. Absolute value is the distance from zero. And it is notated with these bars. They're not parentheses. They're not brackets. They're bars. Okay. So if I was to ask you the absolute value of 3, that simply means how far from 0 is 3? Well, it's 3 units. It's easy enough. If I was to ask you the absolute value of -3, the distance from 0 would still be 3. So we're talking about pure distance, and it doesn't matter if we're going this direction. It doesn't matter if we're going this direction. We're simply asking what is the distance from 0. So if you notice, these things have the same absolute value, the distance from 0. The distance from 0 is 3. The distance from 0 is still 3, which means that absolute value is always a positive number, because distance cannot be negative. Distance is a positive number. So the absolute value of anything has to be a positive number. All right, so when we're going to talk about solving some absolute value equations. But first, let's look at how we evaluate absolute value equations. So these examples here say evaluate if x equals 6 and y equals -3. So substitution, just like we've been doing. So in this problem, I'm going to substitute in the value for y, which is -3, into this absolute value problem. So this would be the absolute value of 2 times -3. So before you take the absolute value of this, you've got to simplify this down to one number. Well, 2 times -3 is -6. Well, what's the absolute value of -6? How far from 0 is -6? It's 6 units. So the answer would be 6. Okay, so for this one, I'm going to plug in my number. So 3 minus 2, and x is equal to 6. And now I have to simplify this down before I can take the absolute value of it. Well, following PEMDAS, I'm going to multiply here. So -2 times 6 is -12. Now I can do the subtraction. 3 take away 12 is -9. And the absolute value of -9 would be 9. So if you're asked to evaluate, simply plug the numbers in. Get it down to one number, and then take the absolute value of that number. Okay. All right. Here are these steps to solve an absolute value equation. First of all, you have to make sure that the absolute value expression is isolated. Now, what I mean by that is there's nothing outside the absolute value bars on that side of the equal sign. Here, we won't work this one, but if you look at number 8 here, here's your equal sign, and here's your absolute value bars. There's nothing outside the bars on this side of the equal sign, so that one's ready to go. I can compare that with a harder problem like this. See the absolute value bars? Well, you have this -6 outside of it, and you also have that 7 outside the bars. So we would have to work on this before we could start solving it. But we'll get to that in just a second. First of all, that's the rule. Make sure that your absolute value expression is isolated. Okay? Set the inside of the bars equal to both the positive and negative number from the other side of the equation, and then solve both equations. Okay? going to worry about this last step here. So we're just going to worry about solving both equations. So these get tricky, but let me see if I can clear this up for you. So this problem here, it says the absolute value of x is equal to 2. Okay? Well, what numbers have an absolute value equal to 2? Well, the absolute value of 2, that would be 2. But the absolute value of negative 2, that would also be 2. So what I'm saying here is I could put two numbers in here for x and get 2 out. I could put a 2, or I could equal negative 2. Okay. Same with this one, number 2. M could be 14, or M could be negative 14. Now, this next problem, we'll do number 4. It says the absolute value of negative 7a equals 28. So these absolute value bars means that there could be two solutions like this one. They're not always just going to be opposite numbers. You need to know that. Okay, they were opposite numbers in this problem because of the problem. But in this one, that's not going to be the case. So here's how you work an absolute value problem. You're going to have two solutions. So I'm going to work it two different ways. First, just drop the absolute value bars and work the problem just like it looks. Okay? Students, do not miss that one. This is what they missed the other way. So you have to remember to work it twice if there's absolute value bars, because there could be two solutions. So the second way is I'm going to drop the absolute value bars, but I'm going to make this number on the other side negative. And now I'm going to solve both of these and figure out what the answers are. So undoing the multiplication, I would divide by negative 7, and I get a equals negative 4. Here I would divide by negative 7, and I get a equals positive 4. So those turned out to be opposites as well. But again, they will not always be that way. Let's look at number 6, and I'll show you where that's not the case. Absolute value bars, there's nothing outside the bars, so I'm ready to work this two different ways. The first way, I'm just going to drop the bars and work it just like it looks. The second way, I'm going to drop the bars and I'm going to make this number on the other side negative. Okay, so when I solve these two, these are going to be my two solutions. I'm going to add 3, so I get W equals 7. Over here, though, when I add 3, I get W equals negative 1. So these are my two solutions now. Let's look at a little bit harder one, and then we'll move on. There's nothing outside the bars, so I'm going to work it two ways. Once, just like it looks, and once with the negative. These are both two-step equations, so I'm going to add 5. Divide by negative 2. And I get V equals negative 11. Over here, I'm going to add 5. And I'm left with negative 2V equals negative 12. And then when I divide by negative 2, I get V equals 6. So those are my two solutions. Okay. So what happens when there are numbers outside the bars? You have to get rid of them first until you leave just the absolute value by itself. Now remember, these are not parentheses, so I'm not distributing this negative 10. That is not the correct step. You cannot do that. These are not parentheses. They're absolute value bars, and they're treated differently. However, to get the absolute value bars by itself, the steps that I would take are the same as if this was just a variable that I was trying to isolate. I would add 3 first, because I'm undoing that subtraction. That would get rid of that, and I'm left with negative 10 times the absolute value of h plus 5 equals negative 80. Okay, I'm not even worried about this until I get all the numbers gone. So I'm going to divide by negative 10 because even though you can't distribute, it still means negative 10 times all that. And I'm going to undo that multiplication by dividing. Divide by negative 10. So now I'm left with h plus 5, the absolute value, equals 8. And now, and only now, can I work those. So I'm going to work it once, like it looks, and once with the negative. And down here, when I take away 5, I get h equals 3. And over here, when I take away 5, negative 8 minus 5 is negative 13. So I get two separate answers there. There's my two answers. Okay. Special cases. There's always special cases. The absolute value of anything has to be a positive number, right? But this says the absolute value of whatever this number is negative, and that's not possible. And if you understand how absolute value works, as soon as you saw that, you could say no solution. Over here, okay, this is a positive number, so I'd be tempted to solve that. However, I have this negative 3 that's outside the bars. I need to get rid of the negative 3 by dividing. And now I'm left with the absolute value of 2x plus 1 equals negative 7. But remember, the absolute value of anything can't be negative. So no matter what I put in here, the absolute value of anything has to be a positive number, and this says negative. Guess what? There's no solution. Okay? Absolute values have to be positive. That's why we were able to work the previous ones. Right here, that was positive. These problems here, positive, 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 positive. If that number on the other side is negative, you can't do it. So sometimes you'll be solving, and sometimes you'll be simply evaluating. If you plug numbers in and just see what the absolute value is, just make sure you read the questions carefully and understand what you're asked to do. That's assignment 10.